name's Craig Comstock. I work on the Sencha Test product. I'm an engineer on that project. I am going to take a lot of questions if you guys want. So if you wanted to move closer, if you feel like you're going to ask questions, maybe move closer so it's easier to hear you. I'm going to be talking about functional testing with our Futures API and with our new integration with WebDriver. Some other people have talked a bit about functional testing, so I'm just going to mention a few things about that. But my main goal is going to be making sure that you guys understand how the Futures API works. Typically, folks sometimes get confused with synchronous, asynchronous things and those kinds of things. So how many of you, raise your hand if you feel like you're pretty confident in dealing with like a Fluent API or promises, things like that? Pretty not so confident. Okay, right on. It's hard. It's kind of a funny difference in than dealing with like multi-threaded code, in like Java or C++ or something like that. It's a different kind of problem. So first, I'll just kind of look at just kind of a functional test kind of thing. Now, with our new integration with WebDriver, we have the ability to navigate between pages. Kind of the classic problem that we were running into was a single sign-on situation where you might go to one website, log in, and then pass along some stuff to another website. And with our 1.0 product, that would pretty much fail because we were kind of depending on being inside the browser to test. So what we're doing now is launching a browser with WebDriver and kind of injecting our code through WebDriver to do the testing. So what that allows us to do is that when we detect that you've gone to a new page, we just inject it again and pick up where we left off. So functional testing, and I did use this recorder that we have previously, so I'll just delete that and do it again. So if you're like a QA manager or kind of a QA engineer, you might want to record a test instead of writing code. So you might do something like this, go to a login page and just, type in stuff. I won't tell you what my password is until we leave here. Okay, so this one doesn't actually go anywhere, but I'll show you one that does go somewhere in a second. So you see that I've got some events here that I can insert into my test. So now I've got some events, and this is kind of a basis of a functional, like a test case, right? A user case. So I typed some information in and clicked on the button. So that's pretty good, but it could have some problems. If, for example, maybe I was clicking on a particular XY coordinate, or let's say for some reason we changed something about the elements so that we can't locate them anymore. This target field here is a selector locator, and in Sencha Test we have a pretty flexible system for locating elements, which actually we can look at the Sencha docs here. Docs.sencha.com has some pretty good docs about the Sencha Test product. It talks about how we have @path, XPath, DOM queries, as well as component queries, as well as composite queries, which allows you to do both DOM and component queries, rather. It's pretty flexible. So this might be your first step in automating a functional test, say like a written test that you have in your test suite of written manual tests. Well, that might not be quite good enough. You might want to rewrite it using our Futures API. So to do that, the ST namespace has a whole bunch of methods that allow you to locate things and do various things as you test. So I've converted this tab on this text field named user to text field, which is a particular kind of thing I'm looking for with this locator. And the Futures API allows you to write tests in such a way that you don't have to worry about waiting to see if something's present. So like say you load up your web page, and as you kind of saw when I did the recording, it took a little while for the elements to come up and be rendered and all ready. So this ST text field takes care of that and waits for that before it goes on to the next step here, which is type, which is typing into the field. So here you see I've typed in Craig, my first name. And now I do the password, and now you know my password. So that's a classic problem to reveal your password. Anyway, so as well, I've got a checkbox here. I didn't do that actually in this recording, but in the UI there's a checkbox. So the Futures API is really a set of ways of getting at both just regular DOM elements as well as ext components. So, and the nice thing about getting at ext components is that you get kind of domain-specific things to do and things to wait for about those components, like check a checkbox. And there's more complicated examples such as grid, and you can find rows and cells and items, and make if your item is a button, and you can say, well, give that to me as a button, and then you can do things with it as a button. The next step in this, you might want to write your tests more. Is anybody familiar with JBehave or Cucumber or Gherkin scripts? Yeah, so these are scripts where you write stuff that looks like just plain text English, essentially. So for this one, you might say, when login page, set username to Craig, set password to Comstock. There's usually a when, then, different expressions like that. So the advantage of that is that you can refactor your UI a little bit more than you could otherwise. You can write tests that just refer to the username field without referring to any kind of specific selector of any sort. So you could redesign the UI to change it. Now, obviously, in this case, you wouldn't really do that most of the time, but in more complex cases, you might want to describe what the page does more than the specifics of what are on the page. So something that's kind of in vogue right now is to make what's called a page object, which really just abstracts those details behind an interface. So now I could write a test like this. It says, set username, set password, remember, which checks the checkbox, and then submit. So I think in the long run, this would probably help you, especially in more complicated cases, to write a suite of tests that focus on kind of the domain language of what's going on in your app, and not the specifics of how things are being rendered and whatnot. So that's kind of my little spiel on functional testing. So the Futures API, I've got this here. This one actually doesn't do anything, but I wrote it just to give you an idea, kind of an overview of what is available. So for ext components, we have obviously just fairly regular elements. You can click on them, focus them, type. You can navigate around in a hierarchy. You can check to see if some content is like or not like. You can check the text, check the classes, things like this. So that's what you can do with elements. Now with components, it gets a lot more interesting. You can check to see if they're destroyed, rendered, et cetera, et cetera. So there's two main classes of things that we provide in the Futures API, which is an action, is doing something, and a state, which is waiting for something to be a certain way. So you might say, component enable to enable it. That's an action. So that uses code that we provide to you through this API that enables that thing that you found. If you said st.component and then .enabled with a D on the end, that's checking to see if it is enabled. So the idea is to encapsulate how you wait for things, how you know that a thing is in a certain state, and how you do things to it in this API so that you don't have to deal with the details of what that means for each individual thing. So as you can see, there are a lot of things that you can do. Lots and lots. So I'm not going to show you examples of those, but I wanted to give you an idea of just how many things you can do. So the big kind of feature add that we've done, one of them with this 2.0 release, is the ability to go across pages, as I mentioned. So here I'm going to show you a simple login form. Now I'm actually going to, I recorded this earlier, but I'll just record it again so you guys can kind of see what happens. Okay, so now I'll go find my browser, which is over here. This is a real simple static non-ext page that we use to just test out that we can go from page to page. So it's really just a login. I type in some stuff. When I click the login button, you'll notice up here it says local app.html. And then I click the login, it goes to this landing page. It's a different page. Okay, great. That's not terribly exciting, but what is exciting is that you just went to a different page and we maintained control of the test, and you can continue to do more things on that next page. So that's that. Now obviously you can do the same thing with using the Futures API to deal with those things. Now, one of the things you can do as a result of this is you can actually just navigate to things. So we have this navigate method, and you give it a URL, and you can navigate to different places. So I can run this test and show you how that works. Here we go. Find the browser. There it is. Okay, so it's going to run through some tests that I did. You can see that it's working over here. I'll open this up so you can see the tests as they go. Oh no, a failed test. Okay, so here you can see that we're going to some different websites and maintaining control of our test. So this is just part of our test script. We can go to any web page that we want to and examine elements, interact with them, do various things. So let's see what happened over here. Oh, yeah. Anyhow, so with WebDriver in the sandbox, we had to make some changes in the way that we do things. So when you write a test, oftentimes you want to make expectations on the state of things after you do a few things. In the past, well, how many people have used Sencha Test or Futures API currently? Oh, all right, cool. Previously, if you're running in the browser with our Sencha Test code also in the browser along with your app, it's all in there, you could do something like find a text field, type into that text field, and then we have this method called and, which allows you to inspect things. So you might say function CMP for the component, and then you might check something like expect CMP something to be something else, and then it's all good. The problem when we move to doing multi-page apps is that your Jasmine tests actually run in a separate context from the browser that's actually running your app or going to a website. So there's no connection between those two in terms of JavaScript, right? They're two different JavaScript environments. So what we did to get around that was we added this get function, which allows you to get properties and or use accessors like get this, get that on the thing that you're currently working with, which in this case is a text field. So here I did get the ID and get the value for this text field here. Now to check those, we have added this way of getting at that information that you retrieved with get by putting on what we call the future. And I'll get into explaining this a little bit more in just a moment. But suffice to say that this is kind of where we can put it so that you can check it. Because we don't have direct access, like I said, to the actual DOM or anything like that. So let me run this little test. Should be going out to some. Okay. Okay. So we have one problem. So here, you can see our expectations here. I found that there is indeed an ID, and that the value that I set here with this type on the text field is indeed the value that's there. Let's see, WebDriver. Now, the other thing that we did to kind of help with trickier situations, who here is familiar with WebDriver.io, like WebDriver API? Not many. Okay, so as I said, the execution environments are separate. So you run your Jasmine suites here, and then your app or your website is running over here in this other browser. So in order to do something over there, WebDriver has a method called execute and execute async, and we provided an execute method as well so that you can do something over there in the target browser where the application's running. So here I just put an alert, and that's what you saw when I ran the test. So that's, which one was that? That is execute. So we go right here, just run that one, and we should see the alert pop up. I'm over here in the browser. Okay, great. So that kind of shows you that that while you're not in the same environment, you can make effects over there, and in addition, you can return information if you had to go over there. Obviously, in functional testing, you probably wouldn't want to do that most of the time because you're trying to do sort of a black box kind of test, right? You don't want to get into the JavaScript code. You want to try to take it at the UI face value. But if you need to, we have this. So here I do st execute, and then this function right here, a lot of times what we do is we make comments here. We say in browser begin and in browser end to kind of remind ourselves that this code out here is running in this place for the Jasmine tests, and this code is running over in the target browser. And so then I can, the execute will set a value on this future data execute result of the thing that you returned from this execute function. And you can also, if there's an exception, you throw an error or something like that, we capture that on an execute error property. So we can monitor that. Okay, so there's that. Does anybody have questions so far? Yeah, you? We do have code that works with iframe, yes. Yeah, because we ran into that on some sites. So yeah, you can choose an iframe and go into that iframe and then do all the normal stuff that you can do elsewhere. Yeah.
When you're developing your Jasmine specs, are you able to access local storage variables? Like, can you check if a local storage variable has been set?
You can't do it directly with any kind of mechanism of our API, but you can use st-execute to, do things over there and check things and return values. So I mean, that would probably be the way you do that.
So yeah, so you can.
What?
So you could do it?
Yeah, you could do it because I mean, it's a st-execute. You can just send a function and do whatever you like, essentially. So yeah, you.
From one page to another.
Yes.
Also monitor for when the URL change after the page is loaded.
Yes. There's a.
You don't want to wait 300 seconds.
No, absolutely not. So there's two methods for that we've implemented, which is navigated, right? So we have that kind of pair oftentimes, like focus and focused, enable and enabled, and so we can have navigated, which you can just put it in the Fluent API and say, this is navigated to this URL. And wait for that. Also, I found it really helpful. Another method that we implemented was document ready, right? So that you just wait for the document to be ready, and that's kind of better actually, right? So there's two ways to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Is this internally using the JavaScript promise library?
Yes, parts of it are using promises, especially in the Jasmine environment. Yeah, we're using promises. Yeah, there's promises there. Yep. Okay, so a couple other things that we found helpful. These are kind of new things that we added since 1.0 is to, oftentimes I want to write negative cases. So we're probably going to flesh this out a little bit more. But you can do st.expectFailure. And so you see here I expect 1 to be 2. Obviously that's going to fail. That'll add a result for the spec. And then st.expectFailure says if there's any failures, if the spec failed for any reason, 1 reason or 5, and then it actually passes. I think the better nuanced version would probably be, we would give it some way to do a regex or something like that, or a string, an array of things to check to be specific about the failure that we expect. And then obviously if you pass the test and that it should fail if no failures, it fails. So yeah. And then the other thing I noticed too is that sometimes we want to check to see when we say something like st.element or stComponent, we'll wait a certain amount of time for that to be present and rendered. But sometimes you might want to assert that that timed out, and that it's kind of another negative case. So we added that as well, just a timed out function there. So I think what I'd like to look at now is mostly I want to make sure that people understand the Futures API and kind of how it works. So you notice here when I did a recording, we have this stplay method, and we have some JSON structure here of things. Let's call them events or playables, because we play them. This is somewhat equivalent to this code here. So what happens behind the scenes when you say text field, we add an event to a queue of events that says, hey, look for a text field with this locator. And then we add the type event, we add text field, we add type, et cetera, et cetera. All these just become events in a queue of events to execute. And they get executed in order, and they wait each one completes before the next one executes. So, so you have to understand that concept in order to write tests well, because it's kind of like async code, right? You're writing this code here, and it'll just run through all those methods right away, essentially, and then start executing the events later. So in Jasmine, there's a concept of an asynchronous test. In a function over there, you can add a done parameter right there, and then say, if you're done, you can say done, right? Well, that's not really going to work the way you expect it to here, because the done will get called really soon before all these events play. So what we've done is we kind of automatically do that asynchronous done thing for you. You don't have to write anything. You just use the API, and each of these things will wait until they're done or fail. And then when they're all done for that spec, the spec is done. So it's a way of, it's somewhat similar to WebDriver runner, which kind of takes the async fluent API of WebDriver and changes it to more of a sequential series of commands. Yeah?
So just to make sure I understand, so is it guaranteed to type Craig before it types Comstock?
Yes.
It will do that before it does the check, etc.?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And so you can write another function somewhere, and do more stuff if you want to, st element foo, and then you could call it here and here and here, and then what you would get is text field, type, and then, oh, it calls go, so do an element, text field, type, and then an element. So, the execution chain of functions that you call from JavaScript here, each of these st API, Futures API methods just add things to the list of things to do. Yeah, Marcel?
You just showed, could you talk a little bit more about code completion with Futures
Yeah. So it's code completion. So we have, you can see that when I start the ST, we see that we have the various methods that you can call there. And so you can see you have component. It gives you some information about what parameters you can pass. Here you can, typically on all the Futures API, you pass at least a locator and a timeout. So you can decide how long you want to wait for any particular thing to be present. If you don't specify anything, there's a default amount of time that we wait, which is defined, or specified rather, in the runner. So you can say, okay, well, this is the timeout that you want. Let's see, get back to this test. Where is it? Here we go. Yeah. So that's a pretty helpful tool to use to kind of figure out what you can do. Yeah. So here you see that we're also knowing what this checkbox will return, and we know how to do things from there. Any other questions about that? Yeah?
Is there any way to check if the AJAX got invoked?
If an AJAX request got invoked? Not as a specific API function. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how. I mean, sure, there's a way to do that. Yeah, I don't know. Like just knowing that an AJAX API is called would be interesting. Yeah. Yeah?
So when you had done that example with the done method,
Uh-huh.
so you had passed in a function and you were to call it, you said that could potentially get called out of order, right?
Oh, when I put the done in the function up there and called it down there?
Yeah.
It's not that it would get called out of order. I was just kind of trying to illustrate that it's not necessary because we take care of that for you with the API methods. Now, if you add in, like say a set timeout, or you call some other thing that's asynchronous, then you do have to use a done because we don't know what you've done. We don't, we're not wrapping every single function call in JavaScript. So yeah, so if you did like a set timeout, then you would want to put a done up there and put a done at the bottom as well.
So that's what I was wondering, if st dot whatever is some kind of a, you said you're putting it on like a queue. Sounds like an asynchronous kind of queue.
Yeah, it's just a series of things that we're going to play, kind of like the like you see up here, right? This is just kind of a list of things to do, and we just do them. And if like text field or combo box is satisfied within the amount of time, then it goes to the next one and the next one and the next one.
So if I did have something that I wanted, just some generic function, could I call it in there?
You can, okay, so there's a couple ways you can go. With the functional testing that I did, you can see that I have this login page object with functions on it. Now the functions just have API calls in it. So the net effect of this right here is just adding a couple of things to the list of things to do.
Right, so I guess it was like saying converting something that doesn't call st dot something.
Right. And so you can do that with, let's see if I have an example here, with this AND function, right? So the AND function wraps whatever you do inside there with our kind of do something and make sure it finishes. So you can, yeah, you can just do a function in here, and you can also typically one of the first parameter is like what the thing is, the future that you're dealing with. So in this case, there isn't one actually. So I'll go back to this over here. Let's see, like here. So we've got this text field, and I could say .and function, and in the it's a bit tricky because in the browser we can actually get at the element, we can get at the component, but with the separated, Jasmine here and browser here, we can't do that. So we just kept the syntax the same. The second parameter is a done function. So you can go in here and you can do, do something fun, maybe async. And then go away. What is that? Goodness. Okay, and then you can call the done function. And so what that'll do is it will do whatever you want to do, even async stuff. And when you call the done function, this event, this playable part of the list of things to do is done. It'll move on to the next one. Yeah. So. Any other burning questions? No? Okay. So, one other thing that, so I was telling you about how this AND function, this is typically what we use to do inspections. So like in a Jasmine suite, you write a lot of expect clauses. But because we're doing this kind of async queue of events, we can't just put those expects anywhere. We have to put them inside of one of those things that's going to be played in order. So that's what the AND function is for. So in browser tests, I might do an expect, l.id to be awesome or whatever it is, right? In the WebDriver case, where we're separate, this thing really isn't there. So what we've substituted it with is, what I already showed you this, is the get concept. So you get ID, and then you can check it. And I'm not in love with the syntax, but it's what we have right now. So the future is the kind of object that we grabbed from this. It's kind of a reference to the other thing that's real. And it's the convenient place that we can put this data that we got from the get command. So get ID. Yeah, so that's the way we would kind of convert something that you're running in the browser with our new WebDriver tests. So, yeah?
So something from the keynote that they mentioned for the Visual Studio plugin, they had that F1 help thing, so like highlight a thing. Does this do something similar where you can like, oh, what are my options when I do expect?
No, it doesn't do that. This is the ACE editor. We do have some, obviously some syntax highlighting and the code completion. But yeah, no, we don't have the kind of F1 feature on this one. Yeah. Yeah?
Is that AND function running inside browser context, or is it passive?
So the only time that you're running inside of the browser context when you're running this new style of, see the W's there in the circles? That's indicating WebDriver. The only time that you're executing in the browser with JavaScript is that execute. Right? It's very similar to the WebDriver IO API and just the general Selenium API, which is the execute or execute async. So we just kind of made it like that so that we could leverage people's knowledge of that. And that is the only time that you're actually executing any code in the target browser where your app is running.
So when you call that AND, what's the EL?
What's that?
What's the EL?
Oh, the EL. So previously, when everything was running in the browser, right, when you would run this AND function, the function would get the parameters. The L would be the element of that text field, because we were in the same place. But we can't do that anymore. And I guess we didn't think of a real snazzy way of changing the signature. So we kind of left it like that for now. Yeah, and a lot of times what I do, I actually run a really big suite of tests to test our API. And I just forget about L completely, and I just always use the future, because then I can run it in both types. I can run it in browser and then also in the separated WebDriver style. So, a couple other things that, does anybody else have any questions? No?
Just one question.
Yeah.
When you say that it could be asynchronous there, so you're saying that the done will be called after the callback is completed and everything?
So the done is for you as a developer when you're writing the function inside here to tell the framework Sencha Test framework when to move on to the next event. So say, for example, and you'd never want to do a set timeout, but I'll just write one anyway. So if you did this, then you did a set timeout in here, and it's going to wait a second, and then call the done, and then that'll move on to the next event, the next thing. Does that make sense?
So you can call it done from within a callback, for example, of your asynchronous call.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you've got an async method that you need to call, or you could do an AJAX call, and right here, and that might not exactly work, but you can do asynchronous stuff here. In this case, it's not maybe quite as interesting because you have to understand that you're just in a context that just has the Jasmine spec, right? So there's nothing over there on the other side that you might call, really. Does that make sense? Because your tests are running in a very limited environment. Yeah, right, exactly. It's just running your spec, and it's got a connection via Selenium WebDriver to the browser. Our API works on both in-browser and this other method, and it just has two different ways to talk to the browser. One's all contained inside the browser, and the other one uses Selenium and WebDriver to make API calls out to the browser and do things. Yeah?
For this AJAX call check if it's involved, you could also call done function into callback. Would it be right option to do it, correct option to do it, like to check in callback? If it done is called, then AJAX call is involved.
Well, the trick with that would be, are you checking to see if an AJAX call happened in the application? Yeah. More than likely, right? So it might be a bit tricky because you'd have to run some code over there with the execute method. And right now, it's we could probably set it up so that you have an execute async method, which would wait for something. But it's a bit tricky. So I don't know that currently the API wouldn't support something like that. And we certainly want to focus on, with this setup, is functional testing, which typically wouldn't kind of dig into the details of white box testing.
Okay, but if you call it outside of execute method, just in test use case.
Oh, if you made an AJAX call here?
Do done in callback?
Yeah, something like that would work. It would work better and be more interesting, I think, if it was just the in-browser type, where everything is in the browser, your app is in there, and your code is in here. So maybe you set something up to, at that point, I don't know that you're really testing much of anything about your app, right? You're just kind of testing that AJAX works. So, but I think it would be interesting to somehow notice that AJAX calls were made, right? And say, oh, well, poke this button and expect that AJAX call was made, and this is the AJAX call that was made. That might be interesting. Might be more of a unit test maybe, but it's hard to say. Yeah, right. Yeah. So?
In a general case like that, usually the reason you're running an AJAX request is to do some kind of data submission to the server or to get some kind of data. So maybe you can just check the state with another method, another call, basically, to say, hey, server, did they call it? Did I get the data that I expected?
It's possible, yeah, right. And certainly with our continuing use of, Marcelo's talk a few times ago here, he was showing examples of running against a database node module, right? So who's to say you couldn't write your own module or add a different module, some sort of interface to your backend? So you could test, you could maybe even tell your backend, hey, go into state for test 1A. And that's great. Okay, so now the database is all set and perfect for your test. You run your test, and then you check it at the end for, ending state for 1A. That might be pretty cool. And you could do it with this kind of future feature that we're working on, which is to import node modules. That's not an existing 2.0 feature, though. Yeah.
Can you attach to the Ext components events?
Some of the existing state kind of methods do that. So they might, so like expanded or things like that can, if the thing that you're testing isn't yet expanded, they can listen for those events to pop. Yeah, right.
Asking for the components that like store can load.
I'm not so sure about that, but I know that we do have futures API methods that do wait on particular component state. So they do wait for that, and they listen to events so that we're not just sitting there saying, are you ready, are you ready, are you ready, right? Not polling. So I think there is some possibility for people to extend the API, and that might be a case where we might eventually extend it to do that, or maybe we could enable you to extend it to do that, right? So, yeah. No? So, what else? So, any more questions anyone has? Yeah?
Possible to run all this headless, so in a continuous integration system, for instance?
Oh, can you run it in a continuous integration? Yeah, absolutely. So the Sencha Test can run tests. You can choose different things, choose different browsers. There is a companion CLI tool called STC that does the same thing. So you can tell it to run a particular scenario. You see these kind of lab things here, I don't know what you call these, beakers or whatever. These are scenarios, and so you can tell STC to run a particular scenario, and then we have the concept of a farm and a pool of browsers that you can configure, say for Sauce Labs or like a local Selenium node or something like that, or browser stack. And you can say, all right, well, I want to use this farm, say Sauce Labs, and I want to use this pool, which you might define 5 different pools. I don't know, a smoke test has like 3 or 4, and exhaustive test might have 50 or something ludicrous like that. And then you can just say, test time to fail on the smoke test set of browsers. And then you can get back results. The results can be formatted in JUnit or TeamCity or just plain text, so that you can integrate with some, like Jenkins can read JUnit results. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So some of this, front-end testing is new to me, and I'm just curious about the WebDriver versus the UI test. Are both of these things can they both be run headless, or does one absolutely require an interactive desktop session where it can poke at the browser?
Well,
because most CI servers are servers; they don't have
right. Yeah, typically I think in the CI case you would be using like a browser farm, which would have actual browsers. And as Marcelo had talked about in his talk, there are complications there. So we also have the ability to take screenshots, so you can compare run by run, a screenshot, and put up a red flag if things change a lot. And in order to do, and like in IE, there's problems with focus with WebDriver. So you really have to have just one browser kind of in an environment, say in a VM. Otherwise, the focus gets problematic, or if you have 2 browsers, trying to do a screenshot, they're kind of going on top of each other and not working quite right. So, yeah. Does that help? Okay, cool. Yeah? Oh, okay, yeah. So, anything else that somebody wants to ask about? Let's see.
Could you talk to maybe some best practices on organization of large tests? I guess I'm thinking about log-on scenarios where you have to do that on each test, and I would assume these get functions would become rather large if you're navigating through several pages for automation.
Right. So I think what I would suggest is we have the capability here to add additional libraries to the scenarios. And so what I would imagine you would do is create libraries that have, say, page objects, like I was explaining here, for the various pages that you have. And then you could reuse those in various scenarios that you might run. So say you always have to, you probably always have to log in. So all your scenarios might include that, and maybe do a before all or before each. I don't know if you're familiar with Jasmine, but do something before each test or before all the tests, where you log in, and then you continue with your tests. And I would imagine you could leverage that kind of idea for more complex things. You maybe have a suite of, or a collection of 20 different pages that you've coded up, and then your tests can act at this kind of more reasonable kind of level, less detail. I think that, does that answer your question? That makes sense? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks.